Okay, well, it's 3 o'clock here in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thanks so much for coming today. This is a talk on boosting your immunity during the cold and flu season. And we have with us Jamie Paxton. Jamie is a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist here in Charlottesville. She has her master's degree in acupuncture from the Academy for 5-Element Acupuncture and a BA from Duke University. She focuses on the intersection of physical, mental, and emotional health, and striving to alleviate immediate issues while also empowering a deeper level of healing, and resiliency to support ongoing well-being. And Jamie, as I said, has a private practice here in Charlottesville. And if you want more information, you can visit her website, and it's www.jamiepaxton.com. This is all on our website, and I'll put that in the chat as well. So welcome, Jamie. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Carolyn, and thanks to everyone for being here. Can you all hear me okay? Does it sound good? Okay. So welcome, and thank you for joining me. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm an acupuncturist and an herbalist. I'm also new to Charlottesville, so I moved here over the summer and have been making my home here, and it's been really nice to connect with the center in that time. I gave a talk here shortly after I moved, back in July, I think, and it seems like a really incredible resource that you all have here in the community, and so it's nice to be able to join and connect with some folks. So today, the goal for this talk is really to just share some information with you all that I hope will be helpful. Most of what I'm going to talk about are pretty straightforward, basic lifestyle, diet, day-to-day kinds of things that should be easy for you to incorporate into your life to promote better immunity and better all-around health as we have some particular challenges right now, obviously. Not only the coronavirus out there, but this time of year, seasonal changes tend to be the time when people are more likely to get sick. And also, of course, as we head into the colder weather, flu and colds and whatnot tend to be more virulent. So it's a good time to be thinking about these things and taking some extra steps to help take care of ourselves. So as we go, if anyone has questions, I think you can always raise a hand, and Carolyn and I will be keeping an eye out. If it's not, sometimes it's easier to hold questions till the end, but if there's something that comes up that's relevant to what I'm saying or feels like it's holding you up or you're not understanding something, feel free to pop in whenever the question comes up. So with that, I think we'll get started and dive in. I guess I'd like to start a little bit by talking about sort of how I think about immunity from a more holistic mindset. So we hear a lot of talk about, like having a strong immune system and what does that actually mean? So the immune system even in Western medicine terms is not really its own thing, and it's not one single thing. It's this complex interaction of lots of systems in the body. And so that's really how we look at health generally from a more holistic mindset. And so there are things we can all do that will help boost our white blood count and our immune response should we encounter, some kind of a cold or a virus or a bacteria. But there are also part of having good immunity is also having good all-around health and knowing where our weak spots are and tending to those so that we can be robust and able to interact, right, with whatever comes our way. So, I mean, that's kind of how I would define health and immunity is our ability to respond to life and whatever comes at us, whether it's, a pathogen or some stressful life circumstances. And can we respond in a flexible, imbalanced way while staying functional? So can the body hold up and keep running all of its processes and taking care of you? And also, mentally and emotionally, there's a component here too. Stress is a big factor that impacts our health. It definitely has an impact on immunity. And so we'll talk a fair bit today about some things we can do to manage stress and kind of reduce that load. And And so, mental and emotional and stressful life circumstances are also part of, how can we respond to that in a way that we can kind of keep our some degree of equilibrium and sort of ride the wave and keep going with things. So one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk is we have a saying in Chinese medicine that's don't wait until you're thirsty to dig the well. And the idea being that if you wait until you're thirsty and then you start digging the well, you're not going to have water in time, right? And so preventive medicine is really something that's worth thinking about. And I think one of the particular strengths of Chinese medicine. And so it's great to think about what we can be doing, how to set ourselves up so that we're in really good shape and we're able to handle whatever comes at us, right? And so essentially the idea being like we don't want to be a hospitable host to whatever virus or external pathogen might land in our arena, right? And so I don't know if anyone here is a gardener, but this is sort of a theory in natural and organic gardening and farming is, if pests only are present if something is out of balance in the system, right? And so when something is out of whack, then there's an opportunity for a pest to come in and take up residence and get what it needs out of the system. And so we can use a pesticide to knock off that pest and get rid of it, or we can look at what's off in the system here and how do we rebalance the overall picture in such a way that it's no longer a hospitable environment for that pest, right? And so we can kind of think of our own health and immunity in a similar way. And in that way, we're sometimes a little bit less focused on what the pathogen or the disease process is, not ignoring it, but it doesn't have to be the only focus. We can also look at, what is the terrain of our body like, and what can we do to improve that terrain so that it's a healthy, vibrant place and in good enough balance that pests and pathogens and viruses and diseases aren't going to be able to sort of take up residence and thrive there. So we'll talk today about some sort of generic good principles that everyone can do on that front and that will help anybody. But what this also means is that, building strong immunity is going to look a little bit different for everyone because we all have different terrain and we all have different weak spots. And so, when I'm working with a patient, for instance, I'm really looking at like where are the weak links in their chain that need to be shored up so that doesn't become a breaking point, right? And so this is something we can all be thinking about for ourselves, because we all have our own weak links, and this is something you can do for yourself too, right? Like we all tend to know where some of our weak spots are and what some things are that we could do to take better care of ourselves. So I would encourage you, as you're thinking about, specific things you can do for your immunity, to also think about what you already know and what you know you could be doing more of or are doing and want to keep doing to take good care of yourself. Moving into some things that we can all be thinking about. I'm going to start with talking about diet, because this is really critical and something that everyone can make changes on. Diet is important for a number of reasons. Partly there's an important connection between the gut and immunity. We've been learning more and more in recent years about the importance of a healthy microbiome and having lots of beneficial bacteria in the gut and how that impacts a whole range of health outcomes, including immunity, including mood. We talk a lot about the gut-brain connection these days and how having a healthy microbiome can impact our mental health as well as our physical health and really help us handle things, life circumstances better, which is, as we all know, we've got sort of an undue number of stressors in the way that our lives have been impacted this year with the virus out there. And so anything we can do to support that is also really beneficial. So some things to avoid in terms of diet, if you're concerned about immunity. Refined sugar is probably at the top of my list. We've seen that sugar consumption inhibits immune function like right away in the short term, in the aftermath of eating it for several hours, it can inhibit immune function. So if you have sugar as a regular part of your diet, your immune system's not going to be as active and responsive if it does encounter something. Sugar also has an inflammatory effect on the body. And I'm talking about refined and processed sugars here. So white sugar, brown sugar, cane sugar mostly. Maple syrup and honey, I think, are fine. They're good alternatives. Honey in particular actually can be quite supportive of the immune system. It has a lot of antimicrobial properties, and it also, if it's taken regularly over time, local honey specifically, it can help support fending off allergies. So those are okay, but in terms of processed sugars and also sugar substitutes, I generally advise people to steer away from those because they have, pretty much all of them have their own health complications involved with them. But so refined sugar has an inflammatory effect on the body, and in what we would talk about in sort of Chinese medicine energetic terms, it brings heat into the system, and it can also help produce what we call dampness and phlegm. And so all of those are going to undermine your body's ability to respond well to a pathogen. And also, as we know, with a number of cold and flu viruses, and particularly with the coronavirus, there's a heat component, right? People get a high fever. There's also a phlegm component. There's like this thick, dry phlegm that gets stuck in people's lungs and they can't cough it up. Oftentimes the gastrointestinal symptoms that people have are associated with that as well. And there's an inflammatory component of the disease. So sugar is something that I'm really advising people to stay away from right now. Because again, if we're eating things that are creating dampness, heat, inflammation in the system already, and then we encounter a virus and that's its mode of sort of attacking the body is by creating more of these things, we're going to be predisposed to having a worse case or more complications or more symptoms. So sort of the cleaner and healthier the terrain is to begin with, the better off we are. And we can see that as we've learned more about how the coronavirus specifically is acting, and that people with certain pre-existing conditions are more susceptible. And it's interesting because from a Chinese medicine lens, a lot of those diagnoses that people have that are considered pre-existing conditions, we can see the connection as to why they would be predispose someone to have a harder time with the way this particular virus affects the body. So closely related to sugar, I would say, is refined grains and white flour. It's going to have a lot of similar effects. Again, a little bit here and there is okay, but if that's a heavy part of your diet, it's something you might want to back off on and look more towards whole grains at this point in time. Dairy and raw and cold foods are other things that are generally good to avoid as general approach to immunity, and also if you start to get sick, especially if it's anything, any kind of phlegmy sickness, anything where you get congestion, whether it be in the sinuses or in the chest. Those foods are all what we call phlegm producing foods, and they're going to be inclined to make that worse. So cutting them out and avoiding them will both be preventive and also can help you in the moment if you do happen to start to get sick. Processed foods are another one. That's just a general rule. I encourage people to eat more whole foods, less processed foods. You're going to get much better nutrition and energy out of that food, and you're not going to have any of the additives and various flavors, preservatives, different things that are added that can kind of wear down the digestive system and oftentimes also cause inflammation in the body. And then the last one I'll mention in terms of things to avoid, or two things really, is coffee and alcohol. They both, again, tend to put heat and inflammation into the system, and they also both typically increase anxiety. So if you have a tendency towards stress and anxiety, or you're feeling heightened levels of that these days, which a lot of people are, cutting back on coffee and cutting back on alcohol can help minimize that effect a little bit. Then in terms of what are good things to be doing, to be putting into your body, and what you do want to be eating, This is a great time for warm cooked foods. That's general good practice in terms of supporting the digestive system. Anything that's warm and already cooked is going to be easier for your body to digest and to get nutrients and nourishment out of. It's going to, if your digestion is at all compromised, it's going to be a lot easier for it to work with, especially right now. Seasonally, I always encourage people to eat seasonally, and as the weather is changing outside, it's usually good for us to also be adapting a little bit how we're interacting with that. So typically now, as we're heading into fall and winter, it's a time when people start to crave more, warm cooked comfort foods. Things like soups and stews are fantastic. They're really, really nourishing, really easy on the digestion, and are going to support your body so that it has what it needs to be functioning well overall, and also to have a strong immune response should it need to. Things like that are coming into season now too, like all the root vegetables, sweet potatoes, winter squash. These are all vegetables that are really nourishing for the digestive system, specifically through the lens of Chinese nutrition. And so incorporating those are a great thing. Porridges also are a good way to start the day instead of, I mentioned earlier, trying to avoid cold foods. A lot of people like yogurt or smoothies or things like that to start the day. And although they have a lot of really good healthy ingredients in them, the cold food can be sort of like dampens down the digestion first thing in the day. And then the body's going to have to work harder throughout the day to break down its food and get what it needs out of it. And so switching, especially in the colder weather, switching to warm breakfast is a really great way to start the day. Bone broth is a wonderful thing that I encourage people to use. It's got lots of great immune support qualities to it. It can be used as a base for soups and stews, or even to cook. If you're cooking rice or some other kind of grain, you can use broth instead of water, and you get extra nutrients that way. It also can just be sipped. Like if I'm ever feeling run down, or if I feel like I'm starting to get a cold or something, I usually make big pots of it and I keep some in the freezer. And so, I'll just have a little mug in the morning or sip it throughout the day. You can either, increasingly, you can find places to buy bone broth, mostly at natural, sort of like natural food stores and Whole Foods, the farmers market, places like that. But it's also easy and generally a lot more affordable to make it for yourself at home too. So that's something to look into. And relatedly, mushrooms are a really great, a great food that have a lot of immune boosting properties, and you can include mushrooms in your broth making. You can also, if anyone doesn't eat meat and doesn't want to do bone broth, you can do a vegetable broth that's mushroom based, and that's going to have a lot of general, really great nutrition, and also specifically targeted towards boosting the immunity. And less so like, the little white button mushrooms that are kind of widely available at the grocery store. It's better if you can get some of them, I guess, somewhat more unusual varieties or wild mushrooms. So shiitakes are one that are usually pretty readily available these days, and they're known, they have a long history of being used to support immune conditions. Maitake or hen of the woods is another great variety that's sometimes available, and oyster mushrooms. Those are the three that I probably see like most commonly available if you're not out foraging mushrooms on your own. And they're all going to be good and supportive. And reishi too, which is not a mushroom that you eat, but you can sometimes get it dried and you could throw that into a broth or a soup, or you can get it in like tincture form or pill form and take that. And then one other thing that can be good to incorporate is fermented foods. So things that are lacto-fermented, like sauerkraut, kimchi is another one, certain kinds of pickles that aren't made with vinegar, but that are naturally fermented with just salt. And that's what those things are all going to do is it goes back to the gut microbiome, right? And so those are natural forms of probiotics that are going to help you have a healthier digestion overall, and therefore be healthier and more able to fight off anything that comes your way. And, probiotic pills are also a good option for folks if you're not eating those foods on a regular basis. In general, I always prefer to try to get whatever nutrients I can from food, and I recommend that to folks. But supplementation is also fine if that's a more reasonable way or accessible way for you to do it. Whatever gets it in the body really is the best thing, right? And then I guess the other thing I would want to say about diet is that how you eat is as important as what you eat, right? And so we want the nervous system to be in a state of calm when you're eating, because that's going to optimize the body's ability to digest and break down and make use of whatever you're taking in. So, putting good food in is the first important step. And then the second step is being able to digest that and make good use of it. And so some ways to do that we don't always do, we tend to be rushing and hurrying and busying a lot and be busy a lot in our culture. And so eating on the go and in the car and standing up and while working or reading the news or scrolling on the phone, like all of those things are going to kind of undermine, they're going to do two things. One, they're going to undermine the body's own digestive processes. And a lot of them also you're going to be in a state of heightened tension while you're eating. And the more tense you are, the poorer job your body's going to do of digesting and being able to get what it needs out of the food. So sitting down, taking time, not being distracted by other things while you're eating. I mean, conversation and company is good, as long as it's not like a really tense conversation. That can, trying to avoid super stressful topics is usually a good idea over meals in terms of helping your digestion. I recommend staying off the phone, staying off the news, and anything else that either is going to make you feel stressed out, but also in Chinese medicine, when we talk about the digestive system, as with anything else, it's like the physical digestive system, but it goes beyond that. And so our digestive system is also, it's like the same processes that are responsible for digesting whatever it is that we take in. And that can be information, it can be what we're seeing and hearing, and all of that is sort of getting filtered through the same processes. And so if we're giving the body lots to digest other than the food, it's not going to be able to do as good of a job with the food. And so that's another reason also to try to not be super distracted during mealtime. Plenty of water is also important. We know that's good for just all around health, and so the body can be functioning well. It's also good when the body needs to be flushing things out, which is part of how it gets rid of, any outside invaders that get in. We want to be well hydrated so that there's plenty of fluids there. 8 glasses a day is something they say. If you want to be, I've seen some of my colleagues suggesting people drink half their body weight in fluid at this time, as sort of like a stepped up approach. That's, it's going to be a lot of water. So not half your body weight, and I see Carolyn making a face at me, not in terms of pounds, in terms of ounces. So that would be probably for most people an increase in what they're normally drinking. And that can be, if you're drinking things like bone broth or herbal tea, that can count towards your fluid, your ounces also. Coffee and alcohol don't. They're having a different effect on the body. They're not hydrating. But and what else? And I guess just in terms of diet, as I mentioned, I think, so eating a well-balanced, well-rounded diet, so plenty of whole foods, limited processed foods, cooking your own meals as much as possible tend to be more nutritious. Lots of vegetables. In general, most of us don't eat enough vegetables, and so if doing whatever you can to incorporate more into your diet, and all of that is gonna give you a lot of the nutrients, the minerals and vitamins that you need. If you want to be supplementing beyond that, a multivitamin is fine. Specifically for immunity, things that I think about are vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc. We know they all have important roles in immunity. And you want to be a little careful with vitamin D in particular. It's good to know what your levels are before you start supplementing, because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, which means, so whereas vitamin C is water soluble, and if you take in too much, your body's just going to pass it out with your urine. But vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, and the body is not able to pass that out, and it holds on to it. So with fat soluble vitamins, it is possible, if people are taking really, really large amounts, that you can get a buildup of too much and what we call, toxicity in the body. And with vitamin D, that typically what that ends up looking like is kind of nausea and vomiting, and digestive symptoms is usually the first sign. And it's rare. It's not likely that you're gonna put yourself in that state. But the point being, with vitamin D is not going to self-regulate in the body. And so it's good to know what your sort of baseline level is, which is often done as part of standard blood work. And I don't know what the general population is like here. I used to live in Massachusetts, and up there almost everyone is vitamin D deficient, just because our days are short and cold for a lot of the year, and people aren't getting, the sunlight is one of the major ways we get vitamin D. And so given our modern lifestyles, a lot of us do tend to be vitamin D deficient, at least to some degree. And so, so a small amount of supplementation is okay, but it's something you should run by your doctor before you start doing, I would say, if you haven't had recent blood work done. And mineral drops is another one that can be, it has a good alkalizing effect on the body, which can help it fight off infections. So you can buy bottles of like concentrated mineral drops and just add a couple drops to your glass of water a few times a day. And that's good right now too, I think. So then in terms of some other, moving out of diet and into some other lifestyle things, outside of diet, sleep is probably one of the biggest and most important things you can do to take care of your health and immunity. Sleep is the time when the body, rests and repairs. It kind of takes care of any damage that's happened during the day. It's the best time for the body to be able to take care of any healing processes. So certainly if you feel like you're coming down with something or you've been exposed to anything, prioritizing getting plenty of rest is important. And also just as a general practice, usually 7 to 9 hours is a good amount for most adults. If you're feeling tired, take more rest. I think we have a little bit of an attitude often to sort of push through tiredness or think of it as a problem, but it's actually a message from your body telling you that it needs more rest. And we're much better off taking that message and letting ourselves sleep some more, or take a nap if that's something that your schedule allows. Both for the reasons I've mentioned, that it allows your body to take care of itself and repair and heal, but also because if we're not resting when we need to, and we're using things like caffeine or sugar to kind of push through our lulls, what happens is we're actually then depleting, we're pulling on deeper resources and like the reserves that our body has. And we're using those reserves for just our day-to-day functioning. And so then when we encounter something that really requires reserves, like some kind of an infection or major illness, or a really stressful life event that's, takes a lot out of us, we're working with depleted reserves, and we don't have what we need to healthfully, be able to sort of like push through that tough time and then go back to sort of maintenance level, right? And so it's important to be thinking about that before you're in that situation, and to be taking care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis in that way, with plenty of good sleep and rest. And also getting good sleep and being well rested, I'm sure we all have experienced, just leaves us better equipped to deal with whatever stresses and daily taxations there are in life, right? And that kind of transitions us into the next thing, which is stress. Increasingly we have research showing the effects of stress on the body, and that chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation in the body. It undermines the immune system. It makes us much more susceptible to disease. And so managing stress on a regular basis is, aside from just making day-to-day life more pleasant and tolerable, it also has really important health consequences. So I would say, the first thing is you probably already know some things that help you de-stress. And so do what you know works for you, and make a priority, particularly in these times of building that into your daily routine, or, at least several times a week. Do the things that you know help. Some other general suggestions I would make, getting outside is a great thing to do. Fresh air, sunshine are all, they're good for our stress levels, and they're also good for our health in a range of ways. Spending time in nature, if you can. We've got lots of beautiful areas around here that can be just kind of like a balm for the nervous system and can help sort of de-escalate when it's gotten really worked up. Especially if, if you can like take some time and relax there. Getting out and going for a brisk walk or a hike is good too, and has good other beneficial effects. But it's also, when we're talking about stress and trying to calm down the nervous system, it's helpful if we like switch out of that like push and go, like doing mode, and are able to just kind of like be in a more quiet and receptive type space. So another good way to do that is with breathing. And actually, there's a really interesting, a friend just gave me a few days ago a book to read, which I'd read an article by this author earlier in the year. The book is called Breathe, and it's all about, there's a lot of, I guess, very interesting science that's been coming out about the importance of breathing and all the health impacts of it. And, this is something that a lot of the, both like health, traditional medicines and yoga practices and different spiritual practices have for a long time recognized the value of. And now we're seeing, and there were some fascinating stories he shared, specifically about the difference between nose breathing and mouth breathing, and that we want to be breathing in and out of our nose most of the time, and that if we breathe a lot through our mouths, that can actually have negative impacts on our health. And so he talked about, as he was doing research for this book, this journalist, he went to a lab and did a study where they, for a couple of days, they plugged up his nose with little silicone plugs. So he was forced to breathe through his mouth. And in the course of a couple of days, his blood pressure went from normal to like stage 2 hypertension. He developed sleep apnea. His cortisol levels rose. He was fatigued, anxious, depressed. And then once they took the plugs out and he was able to resume his, more or less normal breathing through his nose, there was a dramatic, all of these things started reversing very quickly. And so I'm excited to read this book and learn more about it. I think James Nestor is his name, if anyone wants to look him up. And there was an article this spring in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, that's a briefer sort of summary of some of the points. So anyway, to that end, a suggestion I've been making to people is to just spend a few minutes a day doing deep, slow breaths. And so we can all take a minute now and just practice it. So as I said, you want to be breathing through your nose. And what we'll do is we'll breathe in for a count of 5 and then out for a count of 5. And if you're able to, you can start to extend the exhale. But just doing this for a few minutes a day, setting a timer on your phone or a little kitchen timer or something, can be a really good way, not only to sort of calm the nervous system and lower stress levels, but also to have a whole wide range of other health effects. So we can just go ahead and breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then out 2, 3, 4, 5. In 2, 3, 4, 5. Out 2, 3, 4, 5. In 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'd encourage you, as you're listening to me talking, notice if just those few breaths shifted anything for you. And I would try to, mindfully in the background, keep breathing that way, taking those deep, slow breaths. And I would expect that you'll notice your everything kind of calming and quieting down a little bit. So similarly, another thing that we can do that we don't, we tend to not do a lot, but just take some time to sit quietly and not actually be doing anything. 20 minutes a day can be a really good thing. And if it's nice out, it's great to sit outside and you can be getting your fresh air and sunshine too. But just sitting and not, to be out of a state of like where we're not consuming the news or the information or anything, and we're not busy doing and like putting out, but just sort of arriving where we are and doing a little bit of grounding. And if that's hard for you to do, to just sort of sit still and not do anything, then doing some kind of meditation is a great practice, something I always recommend to people in terms of managing stress levels. If you don't have a meditation practice that you do on your own, there's a lot of apps out there now that people are using that can be really useful. Calm and Headspace are two that I know a lot of folks like. I think they both have a free trial and then tend to be paid subscriptions, although some of them are offering, I know some of them have been offering like free access this year as everyone's been dealing with higher stress levels with the pandemic. And they have a whole range of different types of guided meditations, and they can set up little reminders so that you will do that 20 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day every day. And then there's also a third one that I have on my phone that's free, and it's called Insight Timer. And it's got a timer that you can just set a time for yourself, or it has a lot of different guided meditations. It also has a paid version that you can upgrade for. And in that case, I think there are classes you can do, like class series, and you can download things and have access to them offline. But it's got plenty of good things on there. And it also has, the reason I have it is I'll sometimes use it at night if I'm feeling kind of wound up when it's time to go to bed. And they have some Yoga Nidra for sleep meditations, and it's basically a guided meditation that someone walks you through. And Yoga Nidra is a whole practice of itself in the yoga world that's really great. It kind of helps the body drop into a really deep place of relaxation. And so it can help you fall asleep, and it can also help promote deeper sleep. If that's something that you struggle with. So that one I like. Another one that's good right now in terms of stress release is doing a little bit of self-massage, and this can be just on your face. So we hold actually an unbelievable amount of tension in the face, and so you can just do, you can just, be doing anything that feels good, moving your hands around on your face, on your neck, on your ears, pulling on your ears, and sort of massaging them is really great. There's actually some 160 or 70 acupuncture points in the ears that correspond to all different parts of the body. So by stimulating the ears, we can really help get things moving and sort of reset the whole system. But also when it comes to the face, areas that are can be particularly helpful. The jawline is an area where we hold a lot of tension. And so kind of starting back by the ears and just massaging up forward. And then around the eyes, so the brow bone, right in here, there's an acupuncture point right in here, towards the top of the bridge of the nose, and then up and along the eyebrows and like right under the brow bone, as well as the orbital bone down here underneath. And so I would just play around, and you can, do this when you're watching TV, when you're lying in bed before you go to sleep, and just see what feels good. There can be, a concrete way to do it, but you can also just experiment and see what feels good and what feels like where you find you're holding tension and what helps to release it. Another sort of related thing that can be good for the immune system is skin brushing. I don't have a brush here to show you, but you can buy these like big brushes and you use them. And people do it, you can do it after you shower or in the morning when you're getting dressed. And basically what it is it's a brush and you use it and you brush away from the center of your body. You can find instructions online, I'm sure, or they might come with a brush if you were to get one. And you're basically, it's stimulating the lymph system primarily. And so that's why people really recommend it for immunity, because the lymph system is hugely important in terms of our immune responses. And so that's basically, and particularly if you work sort of the chest and neck and head, this is where a lot of our glands and lymph nodes are. And that's a way to sort of help and improve circulation in that system. As is exercise, which we know there are all sorts of health benefits for exercise, but including when it comes to immunity, it's going to improve circulation of blood, of the lymph system, of what we call qi in Chinese medicine, and helps invigorate the body and get everything going. And it doesn't have to be vigorous exercise, right? It can be whatever works for you. So it can be some stretches in your chair. It can be going for a walk around the block. But it's always good if you're able to get up and move a little bit. What else? Where are we on time? Oh, it's 3:40 already. Okay. So let's do I wanted to show you guys a couple of acupuncture points that you can do some acupressure on. The first one I'll do, it's right under the collarbone. And what you can do is you can start in the center, and if you slide your fingers out along the collarbone, there's a little bit of a notch a little ways out, which you might be able to feel. If you can't feel the notch, it's you can sort of feel for where your sternum is, the edges of your sternum, and come up from there, and it's a little bit out from there. It's probably roughly halfway between like the middle of the collarbone and where the nipple line would be is where this notch is. And then you're just going to drop right below that, right below the collarbone into this fleshy area above the first rib that you can feel there. And just if there's a particularly tender spot in that area, you can focus on that. And if you're not sure if you're in the right spot, you can use several fingers and just massage the larger area and you'll be getting it. And this is a great point. It's a point on the kidney meridian. It's called storehouse. It helps tap into some of our reserves. It's a really good point for stimulating the immune system. It's also a useful one if you have any respiratory conditions. So it helps to open up the chest and make it easier to breathe. It helps when there's a lot of coughing and which is like an upward rising, it can help to calm that. And it does what we call, it descends the qi. So it helps the qi that's moving upward sort of like calm and move downward, which is the way it should be going in the lungs. And so that way it can help calm a cough if you've got that. And you can just massage it, for 20, 30 seconds. These are things you could do, you could just do this every day, this little routine that I'm going to show you as a way to kind of support the immune system. So that's the first point. Yeah, I see everybody who's doing it, it looks like you've got it right. And then there's another one that's on the leg. So I'm going to stand up for a second here and see if you can see me. So this point, so what you want to do for this one is you're going to find your shin bone here, and then you're going to slide your fingers to the outside edge of your shin bone. So like towards the pinky side of your foot, and you should be able to feel the edge of your shin bone there. And it's easier if you don't have, like I've got kind of thick pants on, but so you can do it just right on your bare skin, and that might be easier. So then once you find that shin bone, what you're going to do is you're going to take your hand and you're going to line your hand up right with the bottom of your kneecap. There are two little dimples that are often visible there that you could use as a guide, or you can just look for, like the round kind of ball of your knee and just line up under it. And then where the bottom of this hand falls and where it intersects with that edge of the bone, there's like a little nook right there. And this is where the shin bone, this is the tibia, and it comes up and it starts to flare out here towards the edge. And so you're just looking for a little spot, a little depression right in there. And again, look for any area that feels particularly tender, and you can focus there. This is a great point. It's a point on the stomach meridian, so it's really good for digestion. It's also great for energy. It's called leg 3 mile, and they say that if you're tired and out of energy and you needle that point, then you can walk another 3 miles, is how it got that name. So it's a good one also for anyone who struggles with fatigue, but it's also probably the best point that we know to stimulate the immune system, and it's been proven to increase white blood cell activity by activating that point. So that's a good one you can just do on a daily basis too. And 20 or 30 seconds, you can do it while you're sitting around. Yeah, I see a question. Go ahead, Dolores.
You'll need to unmute yourself, Dolores.
Thank you.
There you go.
On both of your legs?
Yes. Yep. You can do it on both legs, and you can do it one at a time, or you can do both at the same time, just whatever's comfortable. And you can do it multiple times a day. Like, you're not going to overdo it. But yeah, if you just take a couple minutes each day and do these 2 points. And then there's another one I'll show you. I'm just going to take a sip of water.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a point right behind the earlobe. And this, I don't know that I'm going to be able to show you. I don't know if you can see if I turn around.
Yep, we can see. That's okay. Good.
Yeah, so if you just put your thing, can you hear me too when I'm doing that?
Yes, pretty good.
Okay. So you're just going to put your finger kind of right behind your earlobe, and you're right behind the jawbone there. And this is a spot that you can just massage. This is a good one, particularly if you've been exposed to something or you feel like you might have a cold coming on. The one I just showed you on your leg and this one together can help kind of knock out something that's coming on. And this is actually a good one. Can be tense back there, so it could also help the stress relief we were talking about. So those are a couple of acupuncture points that are easy for you to incorporate with some acupressure. And then I'll just take a couple minutes to talk about herbs, which more, rather than trying to teach you anything about, treating yourself with herbs, I would love for people to know that herbs are out there and they're a resource available for you. They can be really helpful both for prevention. There are formulas that we tend to use in Chinese medicine when people have chronically low immunity, people who tend to catch colds a lot and get sick really easily. There's a couple standard formulas that we can give that will help support that. And then also, to the point I was making at the beginning, herbs can help support you in whatever your sort of weak spot is, right? That might be your inclination. If you tend to get, whenever you get sick, it goes to your chest and you get, a cough and phlegm and bronchitis, or you always get sinus infections, things like that. We can, herbs can be sort of tailored to help to be used up front preventatively. And then there are also herbs that can be used if you start to get sick. And this is something I didn't know about really until I started, I guess, going for acupuncture. And I went in one day and I was getting a cold, and my acupuncturist brought out a little bottle and he said, here, take a dose of these, take them home, take them every few hours. And I was fine. I never got sick. And so I brought a couple different, just to show you, not that these aren't things that you can buy on your own. Chinese herbs are regulated within the profession because it's really important. Herbs are medicine and they can have a pretty strong effect on the body. And so it's important that they're used properly. And so the wrong herbs for the wrong person can be detrimental. And also herbs interact with certain medications and also certain conditions. So especially anyone, as I talk about immune boosting, anyone who is immunocompromised, anyone who has an autoimmune disorder or is on immune suppressant drugs, we need to be really careful because we don't necessarily want to be boosting their immune system. That can be problematic. But also, a range of health conditions as well as medications herbs can interact with. And so you definitely, if you're under the care of anyone, you want to make sure that you talk to them before you start experimenting with herbs, and I always recommend people see a trained herbalist before they use it. But, so we have different things. So this one, for instance, is really great for like when you get really stuffed up in the sinuses. It can be a sinus infection, or just like when you're really clogged up and not like feeling like you can't breathe and you can't think. This formula is great for that. This is one that's really good for allergies, symptoms. This one is called Cold Away, and it's for like that, one of those early, like when you are just starting to get something, and if you kind of take this right away, you can knock it out. This one is called Initial Defense and is has a similar effect. And then there's also herbs for if you don't catch it in the first stage and it starts to go deeper and it ends up, you end up with a more serious condition. And so just to sort of make a quick mention of that herbs are out there. I know there are a number of acupuncturists in town. There are a number of Western herbalists in town. I know that there are people with resources beyond me here who you can talk to if that's something that you want to learn more about or explore. And I guess just quickly, since we're in the context of coronavirus, there is, there's mostly anecdotal evidence. There are a few studies, though not very comprehensive yet, about using herbs in the treatment for coronavirus. It's something they've been doing in China with effect. But particularly, I think, worth knowing about is that if you or anyone you know were to get sick, a lot of times people have trouble in the recovery, and that's an area where herbs can be really supportive, and it can help kind of restore people back and get rid of some of those lingering symptoms. So I just want to mention that because I think it's a great tool to know about. So I think that covered most of what, quickly through things I wanted to talk about, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, we can do that.
Great. And if you would like to unmute yourself, that'd be great. Or you can put your question in the chat and we'll read it. There you go, Dolores.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
If you were going to mention 3 things that all of us should consider doing every day, what would be your top 3 in terms of boosting immunity?
I think getting good sleep would be number 1. Getting enough sleep. Something along the lines of diet, and that can vary a little bit person to person. I think avoiding sugar and refined grains is a good one for everyone. That would be around the top of my list. And it's hard. It's hard to say because it depends a little bit individually, but I think incorporating something into your diet, like whether it be making sure you're getting enough of those vitamins we talked about, C, D, zinc, eating mushrooms, some of the more medicinal varieties of mushrooms, something that that's actively adding like good nutrients into the system. Would be the third one.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great question.
Yeah.
I see that Anna, did you have a question?
That was me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dolores.
No problem.
I saw Dolores's face, so I assumed.
My question is, do you have a local source of honey?
You know what? I don't. And partly, as I mentioned, I'm relatively new to the area, and so I don't have all of my local sources figured out yet. I was at Rebecca's recently, which is a natural food store on Barracks, in the Barracks Shopping Center, and they had a display there of local honey. So that would be one spot you could go. And actually, there's somebody on Saturday mornings At Ix Park downtown, there's a farmer's market Saturdays from 9 to 1, and there is usually somebody there with honey also, which I'm sure would be a good source, though I haven't tried his yet. The farmer's market is also a good place if anyone's interested in bone broth and doing that. There's a couple of really good farms. There's a farm called Free Union Grass Farm. They're at the farmer's market, and they're also available through some of the drive-through farmers markets and on the farm out in Free Union a couple days a week. And they would be a good place to get bones from for making stocks and broths. They raise their animals really well, so they're going to be really nutritious, and they're not going to have any of the sort of like potentially negative things from conventionally raised meat.
Could you comment on gluten-free foods and whether those are useful?
Yeah, gluten is a complicated question. So everybody has, I think, a different sort of ability to digest gluten. I don't think gluten in itself is inherently a problem, but for some people it definitely does tax their digestion, and it can increase those signs of dampness and phlegm we talked about in terms of like bogging down digestion and foggy headedness and things like that. So I guess my preference, I think a lot of the concern I have with a lot of the gluten-free foods that are out there is they have other things added to them. A lot of times they have gums added for like texture wise. And those people can have reactions to those. They can upset digestion. So as with everything, I would recommend reading ingredients, and you want something that's like as close to pure whole ingredients as you can find. Things that are made from, like just almond flour, I think are fine, as long as obviously you're not allergic to almonds. There's a brand called Simple Mills that I like. They have really good clean ingredients, and everything I've tried of theirs has been pretty delicious. So that's one to look out for. But like when there's like a lot of xanthan gum and guar gum and things like that in gluten-free foods, I mean, you can experiment with it, but I tend to try to avoid those.
Jamie, can you talk a little bit about why not dairy, and then the importance of which organics would you choose if you certainly can't do everything organic?
Yeah. So dairy is another one of those foods that can produce like phlegm and dampness in the system. And when I talk about dampness, that's a Chinese medicine concept. And basically what it is it's fluid in the body that the body's not using productively, and it can kind of bog up the works. And when it gets more severe, it like manifests as phlegm, which, we know from our respiratory system. But it can also be, like I mentioned, that foggy headed feeling if you have a lot of a tendency towards congestion or postnasal drip. Like a heavy feeling, like sometimes it feels like it's like hard to lift the limbs, or you feel kind of bogged down. All of those can be signs of dampness in the body. And basically that's going to undermine, from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's going to undermine your body's ability to like have a strong immunity. And it's going to potentially get in the way of any number of systems operating optimally. But it also, specifically with like a lot of colds and the coronavirus, it's going to make you more susceptible to having worse symptoms if you already have dampness. And so dairy, some people are fine with it. Some people can digest it because they have good, strong digestive systems. And some people have a tendency to accumulate dampness in their system. And so they need to be more careful with it. And also it's usually cold. And as I mentioned, cold foods can be harder on the digestive system. So again, a lot of it's going to vary person to person, how much you can do. So that being said, dairy is one that I think organic is really valuable in. I probably prioritize actually where I get my meat more than anything else. And more so than strictly organic, I like to buy, I try to buy my meat locally, and from farmers who are raising things on pasture. Because organic is good when it comes to meat, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the animals, they have to have access to outside, but they're not necessarily free ranging outside. It does mean that the food they're eating is pretty clean, but they might not be eating, like a lot of organic eggs, it'll say like vegetarian diet on them, right? But like chickens are not naturally vegetarian, they're omnivores, and they're gonna be outside eating bugs and grubs and all sorts of things. And so organic is in that case isn't always, it's good and it's better than conventional, but it's not necessarily meaning the animals have access to the best nutrition and the best lifestyles. So I actually look more for pasture raised when it comes to meat, and especially, anything where the farmers are local and I can have a conversation with them about how they're raising their animals. And but the good thing about organic is that they are going to have some access to outside. There are limitations around the kinds of hormones and antibiotics that they can use. And so I think eating more good quality meat is better for us than eating less good quality meat, because it tends to be quite a bit more expensive, is a good move for most people to make. And it's going to be a lot more nutritious too. When the animals are eating a more nutritious diet, the meat is going to, and the bones and whatever you're getting out of broth you're making is all going to have a lot more nutrients for you. And then you can Google, there are, the lists out there, like the Dirty Dozen, I think they call it, of top things to buy organically in terms of produce. And what those are is it tends to be the produce items that a lot of them are high water content, so they're going to soak up more of whatever pesticides and herbicides are being used on them. And so they're things that are better to buy organic. And so that would be a good place to look in terms of produce.
But cheese isn't dairy, right? Not with cheese.
Yeah, cheese is a tricky one, actually. There's not a lot of organic cheese out there, but yeah. If you buy from smaller producers, the milk's probably coming from a better source, but it depends where you're doing your shopping. Craft cheese is probably not the best in that regard.
I'm sure some of us, when you started mentioning diet, are like, I eat that. Yeah, I eat that. Okay, what's left? Oh, that doesn't look very tempting. But I think, just making a change or two, right, is a really good thing. Like one of the things I've done is maple syrup and honey more than, and I like it better. I found out I like it better.
Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting too, is you start to make changes. I think your body responds and your tastes start to change. And also, when I try to do, if I'm going to eat sweets, I try to do most of my baking myself, so that I'm using more natural sugars and I'm using more whole grains and organic flours and things. What I found now is if I make something with just like white flour and white sugar, it doesn't taste very good to me, because it doesn't have, there's a lot more complexity of flavor when you're incorporating some of those other things. So and I know, I listed off a ton of things, which obviously I'm not expecting you all to go do all of that tomorrow, but it's just giving you lots of options and different ways to think about, and slowly incorporating a change here and a change there. Because slow and sustainable change is much more effective than trying to do everything and then in a few weeks giving up. So,
great advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And any more questions or comments? Jamie, can folks? Bruce, did you want to say something?
I just thought it was a great presentation, so we thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, Bruce. I'm glad you were here.